The eviction notice landed beside the mashed potatoes. Not metaphorically. My father actually slid a cream-colored envelope across my own Thanksgiving table, right between the gravy boat and the dish my neighbor had brought over, then sat back like he'd just said, "Grace." Across the top, in bold, it read, "Notice to vacate and surrender possession." My mother smiled first. That was how she always did ugly things. Not yelling, not shaking. Just that small, tidy smile that made cruelty look like administration. 7 days, she said. Your brother needs this house. My brother, Luke, didn't look embarrassed. He looked relieved. That somehow made it worse. I stared at the paper without touching it. 6 years earlier, when my grandfather Owen died, he left me the house in Asheville outright. Not my parents, not both grandchildren equally. Me. And he had signed a recorded transfer on death deed and made sure it was filed properly months before he passed. He did it because I was the one who took him to cardiology, paid the roofer when the porch started sagging, and spent my Saturdays fixing handrails while Luke borrowed money and called it bad timing. My parents never accepted it. They called it unfair. Said Grandpa had been sentimental. Said he overreacted to Luke's rough patch. What they meant was simpler. Their favorite child wanted the house, so in their minds, the house should become his. Luke had made my life miserable long before the inheritance. He stole from me in high school, wrecked my first car, and let me take the blame for weeks. And once accidentally shut off the breaker to my room the night before final exams because he thought I was acting superior for getting a scholarship. My parents always had a reason ready. He was stressed. He was young. He didn't mean it like that. Now he was 32, broke again, and sitting in my dining room while my father tried to evict me from my own property. Mom folded her napkin and said, "You've had a good run here, Mara, but Luke needs a real start. This house can do that." I finally looked up. By what authority? Dad tapped the notice with one finger. "Legal demand. You can either make this smooth or expensive." I picked it up then. It wasn't a court order. It was a lawyer's letter dressed to sound like one, full of phrases like adverse occupancy, family, equitable interest, bin and surrender of premises to rightful beneficiary claimant. It was intimidation on good paper. Luke leaned back in his chair. "You live alone. I've got actual needs." I laughed once. I couldn't help it. That house had not fallen into my lap. After Grandpa died, I paid the taxes, refinished the floors one room at a time, fought with the city over old permit records, and worked double shifts for a year to replace the furnace before winter. My parents had not lifted a finger. But now that the neighborhood had climbed and the house was worth close to $600,000, suddenly they were talking about fairness. Mom took my silence as weakness. "Your grandfather was being dramatic when he deeded it to you. We all know that." We all. There it was, the family vote. The favorite trick. Dad reached for his wine and said, "Or the lawyer believes Luke has a viable claim because Owen intended this property to stay in the direct family line." "I am the direct family line," I said. Luke snorted. "You know what he means." "Yes, I did. He meant son. He meant favorite. He meant the person my parents had spent my whole life preparing the room for." I set the notice down. "You served me at Thanksgiving." Dad shrugged. "I figured if we did it face to face, you might behave like an adult." I almost answered, but the doorbell rang. Nobody moved. Then it rang again, and I stood, walked to the front hall, and opened the door to my next-door neighbor and best friend Priya, holding a pie carrier in one hand and a sealed legal envelope in the other. Priya worked at a downtown estate firm. But she was also one of the only people who knew my father had been making calls about the house for weeks. I had told her 3 days earlier that if my parents tried anything at dinner, I wanted to know exactly how much trouble they were stepping into. She looked past me, saw my face, and knew immediately. "So," she said softly, "they did it." I nodded once. Then we walked back into the dining room together. My father straightened. Who is this?" "My neighbor," I said, "and my witness." Priya set the pie on the counter, stepped to the table, and held out the sealed envelope. "This was left for Mr. Bennett at the office," she said. "Certified. My boss said he'd want it tonight if he really handed over that notice." My father took it with a frown. "What is this?" Priya's voice stayed calm. "Open it." He did. I watched his eyes move across the first page, then stop. The color drained so fast from his face, my mother turned before I said a word. Dad looked up at me, then back at the letter, and for the first time all evening, he didn't look confident. He looked caught. Luke leaned over. "What is it?" My father didn't answer. Priya did. "It's a copy of your father's own sworn statement from probate," she said, "the one where he admitted Mara was the sole lawful owner and agreed that any family member who tried to challenge her possession would forfeit the rest of Owen's trust distribution." My father read the page twice before he spoke. "That doesn't mean what she thinks it means." It was such a weak line that even my mother turned toward him too fast. Priya didn't hand him the rest of the packet. Once she kept it in her own hands and slid only the first page closer beneath the dining room light. "It means exactly what it says," she replied. I stood at the head of my own table and finally picked up a fork just to keep my hands from doing something less elegant. Luke was already leaning halfway out of his chair, trying to read over my father's shoulder, and my mother had gone still in that dangerous way she always did when control started slipping, and she wanted to decide whether to lie harder or retreat gracefully. She chose harder. "Probate paperwork doesn't override fairness," she said. Priya looked at her. "Good thing this isn't about fairness." Then she tapped the second paragraph. I knew that paragraph. I had never seen the full sworn statement before, but I knew the language because Grandpa's lawyer explained it to me after the funeral. My grandfather didn't just leave me the house through a transfer on death deed. He also left a separate investment trust for my father, mother, and Luke. Not enormous money, but enough that my parents treated it like a wounded entitlement, about $240,000 split over time, contingent on signing a family settlement and non-contest acknowledgement. The point was simple. The house was mine. The trust was theirs, and if any of them tried to challenge title, interfere with possession, or assist someone else in asserting a false claim to the house, their trust shares could be cut off and redistributed under the penalty clause. Grandpa had known exactly who he was dealing with. My father had signed anyway. Now that was the statement now sitting in his hand. Luke finally snatched the paper from him. "Let me see." Dad grabbed for it too late. Luke's eyes ran down the page, then up, then down again slower. "What the hell is this?" he asked. I answered before Priya could. "It's Grandpa making sure you couldn't bully me out of the house after he died." My mother snapped, "That is not what Owen intended." "It's literally what he signed," Priya said. "No," my mother said. "It's a trap written by lawyers." Dad found his voice again. "This is only a probate declaration. It doesn't stop us from asserting equitable family occupation." That phrase was so ridiculous I nearly smiled. Priya didn't. "Then you should read the attached trust clause before you keep talking." She pulled the second page free at last and handed it directly to Luke. But that was strategic. My brother always believed paper more when it came through his own fingers. He read the paragraph aloud without meaning to. Any beneficiary who directly or indirectly contests title, possession, or beneficial ownership of the Asheville residence transferred to Mara Bennett, or supports another person in doing so, shall be deemed to have predeceased distribution under Article 6. The room went quiet. Even Luke understood that language, not because he was legally gifted, because he heard the phrase deemed to have predeceased distribution and knew it meant one thing in ordinary English: you get nothing. My father stood up so fast his chair legs scraped the hardwood. This was never supposed to be used like this. I laughed once. "Against you?" Mom turned to me. "Your grandfather was under pressure." "No," I said. He was under observation? That was true too. The last year of Grandpa's life, he saw everything more clearly, not less. He watched Luke borrow his truck and return it with a bent tailgate. He watched my father hint that the house would be more useful in male hands. He watched my mother reframe every kindness I did for him as temporary performance. He never said much at the time. He just asked quiet questions and made appointments with lawyers none of them knew about until after he was gone. Luke slapped the paper against the table. So what? Grandpa can just decide I'm homeless forever because Mara played nurse for a year? That did it. I set my fork down and looked straight at him. You are not homeless, I said. You are 32, employed for the 4th time in 3 years, and still convinced everyone else's roof is your birthright. He pushed his chair back. This is exactly why he shouldn't have left you the place. You always act like you're better than everybody. No, I said. I act like the person who paid for the furnace, the taxes, and the roof after all of you disappeared. My mother rose too, but slower. You're being cruel. That word in her mouth almost made me dizzy. Cruel. As if serving me eviction papers over turkey and stuffing had been an act of tenderness. Priya reached into the envelope again and brought out one final page. This is the part your husband should really see, she said to my mother. She placed it in front of Dad instead. A notice from the trust administrator, not yet filed in court, but drafted and ready. It stated that if he pursued the eviction threat, or encouraged Luke's occupancy claim, or failed to withdraw any demand against the house within 72 hours, the administrator had authority to suspend all pending trust distributions and seek instructions for enforcement of the forfeiture clause. Dad looked sick now. Not morally sick, financially sick. That was the first real emotion I'd seen on his face all night. Luke saw it too. Wait, how much are you talking about? No one answered. That meant enough. My brother turned on my father instantly. You told me this was clean, Dad snapped. It was supposed to be. I looked at him. Meaning what? You thought I wouldn't know the difference between a lawyer's scare letter and an actual order? Mom cut in fast. We were trying to solve a problem privately. No, I said. You were trying to scare me out before someone read the fine print. Priya folded her hands. And now that everyone has read it, I suggest you take back the notice, leave the property, and stop discussing a house you do not own. Luke was still staring at my father. How much do we lose if she reports this? Priya answered this time. Potentially all of your remaining trust share. He actually swore at Dad. Not me, not the house. Dad. And that was when I realized Grandpa had built the clause exactly right. He hadn't written something to make them feel ashamed. He had written something they would understand immediately. Consequences in money. My father grabbed the eviction notice off the table as if taking the paper back might erase the fact that he had slid it across to me in the first place. Then there was another knock at the front door. 3 firm raps. Not friendly, not social. Priya looked toward the hallway. I did too. Then my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. This is Caleb Mercer with Harlan and Rowe, Trust Administration Council. I'm outside. Do not let them leave before I speak to your father. Caleb Mercer was in a dark wool coat and carried himself like a man who spent most of his life telling families things they didn't want to hear in complete sentences. He stepped into my dining room, took in the half-finished plates, the eviction notice in my father's hand, and the trust papers spread under the chandelier, then said, "No one needs to explain the atmosphere. I can see it." My father tried first anyway. "This is a private family matter." Caleb set a leather folder on the table. "Oh, it stopped being private when you used counsel to threaten possession of a deeded residence in direct conflict with a signed non-contest acknowledgement." That shut him up. Priya moved aside so Caleb could lay out the papers. He didn't sit. Neither did my father. The rest of us stayed where we were, suspended in that strange, half-domestic, half-legal silence that only families like mine could create over stuffing and cranberry sauce. Caleb looked directly at my father. "Did you deliver a notice to vacate tonight?" Dad tried to recover some dignity. "I delivered a demand letter." "Same answer," Caleb said. Then he pulled out 3 stapled packets, one for my father, one for my mother, one for Luke. "Those are formal notices from the trustee," he said. All pending distributions under Owen Bennett's residual trust are suspended effective immediately pending review of a possible forfeiture event. Luke grabbed his copy before my father could stop him. "You suspended everybody?" Caleb didn't blink. "Yes." "For her?" Luke said, jerking his chin toward me. "No," Caleb replied. "For your grandfather's paperwork." That landed better than any speech could have. He opened his folder again and slid one more page into the middle of the table. "This is why we moved tonight." At the top was an email chain from 2 days earlier, from my father, to the trust administrator. Subject line: Mara transition agreement attached was a scanned 1-page statement supposedly signed by me, or acknowledging that I had agreed in principle to surrender occupancy of the Asheville residence to Luke by the end of the calendar year in exchange for family assistance and harmony. I stared at it. The signature looked like mine if you'd only ever seen it on a prescription bottle. It was fake. Again. My mother went white before Luke did. That told me everything. She hadn't known Dad had sent it, or she had known and assumed no one would ever read it closely. Caleb tapped the page lightly. The signature discrepancy was obvious. The problem for your father is that he sent it to a trust office that keeps specimen signatures from the probate settlement. Dad's mouth opened, closed. Then he said, "It was a draft understanding." "Between whom?" I asked. "You and your imagination?" Luke rounded on him. "Oh, you told me she'd already softened." Dad snapped. "I said she might." "No," Caleb said. "You said she had agreed in principle. I have the email." My father looked like he wanted to tear the paper in half, but he knew better than to damage something already in counsel's possession. Mom made one last attempt to reframe it. "We were trying to avoid court." Caleb turned to her. "By fabricating her consent?" No one answered. He continued in the same calm tone. "The trust gives the beneficiaries a cure window only if interference stops immediately. That means the eviction demand is withdrawn. No occupancy claim is asserted, no utilities are transferred, no locksmith is retained, and no one steps onto the property claiming possessory rights." My head came up. "Utilities?" Caleb looked at me. "No, your father also asked whether Luke could establish utility history at the address before year end. The power company refused without deed support." I laughed once softly. Of course they had started there, too. Luke was staring at his father now with open anger. "You said this was clean." "It would have been if she'd behaved," Dad snapped. Priya actually made a sound at that. Caleb did not react. There was no version of this that was clean. Luke flipped through the suspension notice faster, eyes catching only what mattered to him. "How much gets frozen?" My father said. "That's not the point." Luke looked up sharply. "How much?" Caleb answered, because he always struck me as the kind of man who believed truth was cleaner than tension. "Roughly 80,000 per beneficiary, plus residual accounting." Luke went still. And the house was worth far more. I could see the math happening behind his eyes. That was the moment I got scared again. Not because of the trust, because I knew my brother. If he thought the house was still obtainable, losing 80,000 would not stop him. It would just make him meaner. And right on cue, he shoved back from the table and said, "Fine, keep the trust." My mother turned. "Luke." "No," he said. "Grandpa got manipulated. Everybody knows it. I'm not backing off because Mara found another lawyer to wave paper around." Caleb's voice stayed flat. "If you step onto that property claiming possession, you will be trespassing." Luke smiled then, but it was a bad smile. Loose, angry, familiar. We'll see what the sheriff calls it. He walked out before anyone could stop him. My father swore under his breath and went after him. My mother hesitated only long enough to gather what dignity she could still carry, then followed. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the china cabinet. The house went quiet. Priya let out a breath. "He's not done." "No," Caleb said. "He isn't." He looked at me. "You need cameras saved, title copy at the door, and no one opens to Luke alone. If he's already called for a civil standby, he may try to create possession before Monday." That phrase sat in my chest like ice. Before Monday, before courts opened, before normal people could fix what bad families did on weekends. I barely slept that night. At 7:13 the next morning, my phone buzzed with an alert from the porch camera. I opened it and saw Luke on my front steps with a locksmith, 2 duffel bags, and a Buncombe County patrol car idling at the curb. Luke was standing on my porch like he already lived there, 2 duffel bags at his feet, a locksmith beside him with a clipboard, a county patrol car idling at the curb. The deputy stood near the steps with that careful, neutral posture officers use when they know a family is trying to turn them into a shortcut. I watched it all from the phone in my hand for 1 second, then opened the front door before Luke could knock again. He smiled immediately. "Good, you're awake." The deputy stepped forward first. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Harlan. I'm here for a civil standby only. No one is being removed. I'm just keeping the peace while they retrieve property or clarify access." "Retrieve what property?" I asked. Luke lifted one duffel slightly. "Mine." I looked at the bag, then at him. "You have never lived here." Mom's line from the night before flashed through my head. "Your brother needs this house, not a room, not a couch. The house." Deputy Harlan looked between us. "Do you own the residence?" "Yes." I already had the deed copy in my hand. Recorded transfer on death deed from my grandfather. Filed before his death. Taxes in my name. Insurance in my name. I handed him the papers. He read faster than I expected, then looked at Luke. "Do you have a court order?" Luke gave a short laugh. "It's a family house." "I have consent." He pulled out a folded paper. I knew before he opened it what it would be. Another fake. This one was a so-called occupancy agreement, typed on cheap legal template language, stating that I had agreed to let Luke move into the downstairs bedroom, pending family transition. My name was on the signature line. Again, not my signature. Deputy Harlan read it, frowned, and asked, "When was this signed?" "Last month," Luke said. "It was not," I said. The locksmith took one look at my face, one look at the deputy's expression, and quietly stepped backward off the porch. "Good man," Luke noticed and snapped, "Where are you going?" The locksmith answered without apology. Not changing a lock during a disputed occupancy with no court order and a deeded owner standing in front of me. Then he walked back to his van. Luke swore under his breath. I kept my eyes on the deputy. "My father sent a forged version of this to the trust administrator 2 days ago. Counsel is already on his way." As if summoned by the sentence, then Caleb's car pulled in behind the patrol unit. He got out carrying his leather folder, came straight up the walk, and greeted the deputy first. "Caleb Mercer, Trust Administration Counsel for the Owen Bennett estate." Deputy Harlan nodded once. "You the attorney she called?" "I'm the attorney her father should have feared." That almost made me smile. Caleb took the paper from Luke, read it once, then held it beside the email copy my father had sent the trust office. Same wording, same fake consent language, same bad imitation of my signature. He showed both to the deputy. Same document family, same false statement. No court order, no possessory right. Luke tried volume. "This is harassment. Grandpa wanted the house in the family." Caleb's answer was immediate. "It is in the family. It is in Mara's name." The deputy handed the fake occupancy agreement back without enthusiasm. "I'm not forcing entry on this." Luke's jaw tightened. "So what? She just gets to keep everything?" "Yes," I said. "That's how ownership works." He took a step up toward me, and for a second I saw the same boy who used to stand in my bedroom doorway smiling after he'd broken something and deny it before I even found the pieces. "Mara," he said, too calm now, which was always worse, "you can either do this clean or we can make your life ugly." Caleb stepped between us just enough to matter. "Threats help my file." Luke looked at him and laughed. "Your file? This isn't court. This is a porch." "No," Caleb said. "This is the beginning of your forfeiture." That landed. I saw it in Luke's face. Not shame. Calculation. Then my phone buzzed. Side yard camera. I looked down automatically. For half a second, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then my whole body went cold. My father was behind my house. He was at the cellar door off the back walk, carrying a plastic storage tote in one hand and something metallic in the other. A key. He had sent Luke to the front with a deputy and a locksmith while he came around the back. "Deputy," I said, already moving. "My father's on the property." Everyone turned at once. I shoved the phone toward him. On the screen, my father set the tote down by the cellar door, glanced toward the yard, and bent toward the lock with a key that was definitely not mine. Inside the tote, visible for 1 second before the camera angle shifted, were men's clothes, a shaving kit, and a stack of unopened mail with Luke's name on it. And they weren't trying to move him in. They were trying to manufacture proof that he already had been. I was already moving before Deputy Harlan handed the phone back. We cut through the side hall, out the mudroom, and down the back steps into the yard. Caleb was right behind me. Luke came too, swearing the whole way, because men like my brother always believed a lie stayed alive longer if you stayed physically near it. My father was at the cellar door when we rounded the corner. The old exterior lock had been there since Grandpa's time. I had replaced the front and side house locks after the deed transferred, but not that one yet because the cellar only held paint cans, tools, and storm supplies. Dad had a copied key in his hand and one foot braced against the stone step like he was about to muscle the door open, whereas the plastic tote sat beside him. Deputy Harlan's voice carried across the yard. "Sir, step away from the door." Dad straightened too fast. "I'm just retrieving family property." "No," I said. "You're creating it." He looked at me with that same old expression, equal parts offense and certainty, as if catching him in the act were somehow ruder than the act itself. Luke came around the corner behind us and stopped dead when he saw the tote. "Dad," he said too low. Good. He understood. Inside the clear plastic bin were exactly the things they needed to fake occupancy. Folded men's clothes, a razor kit, a cheap set of towels with the tags still on, and 6 pieces of unopened mail addressed to Luke at my house. Not old mail, fresh mail, a credit card offer, a cable promotion, 2 bank envelopes, a pharmacy flyer, 1 DMV-looking notice. To all of it clean, uncreased, postmarked within the last 5 days. My father had not come back there to collect anything. He had come to plant my brother. Deputy Harlan stepped closer. "Who owns this residence?" "I do," I said. "Do you give him permission to enter that cellar or leave those items on the property?" "No." He turned to my father. "Then back away now." Dad tried one last angle. "This is all being blown out of proportion. My son has personal effects here." Caleb answered before I could. "Placed here after a civil standby was requested, using a forged occupancy agreement and a locksmith." Then he pointed at the tote. "And if your client's son already lived here, those envelopes wouldn't still be sealed." That was the detail that broke it. Even Luke looked sick, because it was too obvious, too staged, too desperate. Deputy Harlan took out his notepad. "I need names from everyone present." My father actually said, "For what?" "For my report," the deputy replied. "And because you attempted entry onto a deeded property without lawful possession while presenting disputed occupancy paperwork during a civil standby." Luke tried to cut in. I didn't know about the back. That was probably true, and it didn't help him much. Caleb held up the fake occupancy agreement. You brought this. You brought the locksmith. You brought the bags. Whatever you did or didn't know, you were not wandering accidentally. Dad's voice rose. This is still family. Deputy Harlan looked at him with the kind of flat patience only certain jobs teach. No, sir, this is trespass getting dressed up as Thanksgiving. For one glorious second, nobody in my family had a line ready. And then my mother appeared at the side gate. I hadn't even realized she'd driven over after Luke. She stopped when she saw the deputy, the tote, the mail, and my father standing away from the cellar door with the copied key still in his hand. What happened? She asked. No one answered, because by then it didn't matter what had happened, it mattered what was documented. Deputy Harlan photographed the tote, the mail, the key, the fake occupancy paper, and the camera stills from my phone showing my father coming around the back. He took a copy of the deed from Caleb, noted that the locksmith had refused entry, and made it explicit that no one in my family had a right to enter, store property, or represent occupancy at the address. Then he said the sentence I needed him to say in front of all of them. If anyone returns, claiming possession without a court order, they will be treated as trespassers. My mother opened her mouth. Caleb beat her to it. And if anyone continues interfering with title or possession, I will recommend immediate final enforcement of the forfeiture clause. That landed hardest on my father, not because he suddenly felt guilty, because he finally understood the cameras, the forged consent email, the fake notice, the suspended trust, the locksmith, the staged mail. All of it now sat in one clean chain. He had not pressured me. He had triggered the clause. Luke kicked the bottom step hard enough to hurt himself, then swore and limped back toward the drive. Mom followed him, but not before turning to me with that same small smile she used when she wanted to pretend she was still choosing the ending. You'll regret making this so ugly. I looked at the tote of fake mail, then at my father's copied key, then at the deputy writing my family into an official report on my backyard. No, I said, I'll regret not having cameras sooner. They left. Not dramatically. No handcuffs, no cinematic screaming. Just one failed occupation attempt collapsing under daylight and paperwork. By Monday morning, Caleb had filed the deputy report, the forged occupancy agreement, the email my father sent with my fake consent, the porch footage, and the backyard photos with the trustee. Wednesday afternoon, he called me with the result. The trustee made a final determination, he said. Your father, mother, and Luke each triggered Article 6. My distributions are forfeited. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where my father had slid the eviction notice beside the potatoes, and let that settle. All of it? I asked. All remaining distributions, Caleb said, permanently. Under Grandpa's trust terms, the forfeited shares did not circle back to the people who caused the breach. They dropped into the alternate remainder he had named years earlier, a veterans housing nonprofit in Buncombe County and a local library foundation he supported quietly for decades. That detail felt exactly like him. He hadn't just protected me. He'd made sure that if they went after the house anyway, the money would go somewhere useful instead of back into their hands. Luke called twice that night. I didn't answer. Dad sent one email that said, "You chose paper over blood." I wrote back exactly once. No, Grandpa did. I just read it. That was the end of it. No sheriff came back. No locksmith. No more notices. The house stayed mine exactly as it had been when my grandfather made sure the deed was filed properly the first time. And that Thanksgiving table, for all the ugliness they tried to stage on it, became the place where their whole plan finally turned on them. After that, things got quieter, in the only way that matters, legally. Caleb had the trust suspension converted into a final enforcement decision, and no serious attorney would touch another possession theory once the forged consent email, civil standby report, and attempted backdoor staging were all in the file. Luke lost the trust money he thought would cushion the next collapse. My father lost the money, and worse, The confidence that he could still bully his way through a family problem with good paper and a louder voice. My mother did what she always did, told people the situation had been misunderstood. But there's only so much social rewriting you can do once a deputy has photographed a tote full of planted mail in your daughter's backyard. As for me, I changed the cellar lock that week. Then I added 2 more cameras and finally let myself enjoy the house without waiting for someone to reappear and call it fairness. Grandpa had known exactly what he was doing. He didn't just leave me a home. He left me a structure strong enough to survive the people who thought love, pressure, and entitlement were all the same thing. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own father served you an eviction notice at Thanksgiving and your brother showed up the next morning with a locksmith and a fake move-in plan? And which moment hit harder for you, the envelope at dinner, the trust clause, or the tote of staged mail at the cellar door? If you liked the story, leave a like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next one.